And the topic today is moving from power over to power with, shared power. This is a teaching about leadership beyond patriarchy and leadership connected to the deep feminine. It's also equally a teaching about going beyond hierarchical perception, taking responsibility, and spiritual maturity. Everything that I'm about to share is steeped in kindness, and I want us to acknowledge that kindness is not to be underrated. It is the most important force in our world right now. I want to remind everyone as we move into this topic that humans can be brutal. Uh, Greed, hatred, ignorance, othering, punishment, judgment, ostracization. Humans can be brutal. And in leadership, in whatever form that takes for you, it's really important to not take for granted uh, your responsibility to showing up in kindness, generous kindness, like I described, not just compassion, but fierce compassion, and to holding space, which is as inclusive and as aware of the underdog or invisibles as humanly possible. That's part of your work in whatever role you're in. Disclaimer before moving into this, simply to note that I'm a white woman. And so when I'm holding generous spaces and explorations of power, I generally will work with a colleague of color. I've also held spaces where we're exploring power that are just, let's say, for women, for instance. So this is a video for people of every gender and racial background, and I can bring the best that I can bring, but there's limitation to that. What I invite is this. I feel that the exploration for humanity about power, right use of power, what power actually is and needs to be, shared power versus power over, is one of the most important explorations of our time. I'm giving my heart to this exploration in this lifetime. It's not an exploration any one human being can do alone. In other words, I don't have the answers for you. I will ask the questions and share from my own experience in this video, but I really encourage you to bring yourself forth. This is an exploration we can only do together. Please, along those lines, feel free to offer generous feedback on this particular teaching and to be generous in how you support your cohort, your group, and your partners in the heart of listening. I also want to name that I feel a lot of energy in my body around this experience of how mean humans can be to each other. In my work as a Dharma teacher and a teacher of relational mindfulness, I want to assure you, because sometimes it might appear that I get to spend a great deal of time in conscious community and helping people to connect deeply from their hearts. Please know that I spend an equal amount of time helping to mediate and navigate scenarios which are brutal, where people are so locked in delusion, where human ignorance and meanness are incredibly loud and difficult. So I spend a great deal of my time doing Zen surgery and helping people to unhook in those situations. So in this video, I will actually be referring to some notes. I usually just speak from my heart, and please be patient with me as I navigate. Please begin by taking in a deep breath. Just noticing what's alive for you in this moment, really anchoring in your body and with your breath so that you can notice through your somatic feedback system all that arises for you as we explore this topic. For some of you, what I present today might be underwhelming, and for others, it might feel overwhelming. So my strategy is to offer plenty of inquiry questions, and that's what I'll be doing in our follow up emails as well, so that you can really choose the questions that light something up in you to follow and explore. And maybe there are other questions that you've already explored in depth, which doesn't mean we don't need to be revisiting them for the rest of our lives, but maybe there are questions like that for you that feel less alive in this moment. And maybe there are some questions that feel so intense that you want to note it and say, oh, that stirred something in here. I want to make note of that question and be open to the time and space to really go into that. Okay? So let's acknowledge that everything we're doing in the heart of listening is about returning to an acknowledgement of the wisdom and need for deep listening as a way of life, deep listening as a lifeline to return us to our relational intelligence, not just to help us navigate life and work in partnership with one another and with nature itself when times are easy, but to navigate the grave challenges we face and to learn how to love one another across lines, which means ultimately our job in practice, and I believe in this day and age, is to do the work or at least seed it for uh, going beyond hierarchical perception. Even right now, as I speak about human hatred and brutality, we can acknowledge that each and every one of you listening has experienced this in your life. And uh, depending on your race, your sexual orientation, your class, your background, some of you have experienced it most days of your life as opposed to from time to time. Some of you have experienced it directly and much more harshly than others. So that needs to be named. And I think the place that I will first move into is just naming that with all the work we have ahead of us of addressing climate change and an insane disconnect from the natural world, addressing systemic racism and white supremacy, addressing patriarchy, misogyny, all of it. There's both outer work to be done and inner work. And I don't believe that we can really separate the two. The best chance I feel we have at the inner work, which supports the outer work, in other words, the systems need to change, great creative resourcefulness needs to go into reimagining things. I believe that deep listening, the sacred pause, all of the tools of relational mindfulness help us immensely, immensely. I've seen incredibly healing conversations occur across the board in organizations, in families. Uh, these conversations need to continue. And I really believe that relational mindfulness offers an incredible platform for that. In my own life, I'm aware that one response I took personally to how mean the world felt was to choose to give my early work and career to working with plants, becoming an organic farmer, just taking a pause from the world of humans, which I found so full of greed, hate, delusion, ignorance. And the plant world has been such a phenomenal teacher of relational intelligence. Some of you work with plants, so you know this. And it was also a way that I as a sensitive being, could just retract and say, I don't know what it's going to take to help those humans out there. But even in the plant world, which by the way teaches us a tremendous amount about collaboration, reciprocity, there are companion plants. There's plants that really support one another magically to grow and thrive. And there are antagonist plants that just don't work together well. So I imagine each and every one of you, you have your companions in life, your allies, those safe spiritual friendships and spaces. And I certainly hope the Art of Listening is a contribution to that. And we also have to really be honing our tools for how to work with antagonists and unconsciousness. And so for me, I ended up moving to a Buddhist monastery and training in silence for so many years. And I simply knew that the call was, and part of my work was to create much more support for people in relational intelligence in today's world. And I feel like I've gotten to witness miracles through this work all the time, really all the time, because our relational intelligence is so full of wisdom. We've just kind of turned away from it and been listening to the loud voices of conditioning and othering for so long. But I'm also aware of and want to remind us that even in the name of consciousness, people can get mean. Even in spiritual communities, I've witnessed insane, shocking levels of othering, hatred, gossip, um, bullying, people ganging up on others. Also, tremendous abuse of power, and some of you might just reflect in your own life right now, ways you've experienced abuse of power. This is something I'll be asking us to look at, but even ways that you've maybe witnessed it in the name of consciousness or spirituality. Sometimes these are incredibly dramatic examples, like abuse of power by head teachers in a lineage regarding sexuality or corruption with money or things like that. Sometimes they're equally intense, but a little more subtle. And uh, I can tell you that I've witnessed this again and again and again. So we need to not be naive, and not feel that consciousness or a certain level of consciousness or mindfulness puts people off the hook. There are forces that humans can get seduced into. And in my heart of hearts, I really truly believe that so much of it comes down to a tremendous misunderstanding that's been passed down for generation upon generation about power and what it is. If we learn what shared power is, and if we actually support ourselves and one another to return to the richness and potential of shared power, I have great hope for humanity. If we don't, and we continue to perpetuate this notion of power over rather than power with, there are so many repercussions of that. Um, I'd like to just read a few notes for a moment. So, when humans are not taught shared power and how to embody that and live in the uh, resource of that, some of the horrific things that can happen through the paradigm of power over include misuse and abuse of power, lack of trust in our fellow human beings, and in fact, seeing through a lens where we're looking out for other and perceiving different and other, and looking out through the lens that assumes the worst rather than the best or simply kind neutrality to our fellow humans. The potential for unhealthy group dynamics and power dynamics, people competing for power and abusing power within groups. This happens all the time, and we'll speak more to this. Arrogance, the tendency to put one another on a pedestal or put oneself on a pedestal. Bullying, gossip, uh, groups of humans ganging up on each other. The idea of a meritocracy, a system in which advancement is based on individual ability or achievement. This all relates to white supremacy, the tendency to hold certain standards and a paradigm of competition and assumption of what supremacy looks like. That leads to grave lack of equity. And I'm going to speak a lot more to this, but everything I'm pointing to is about the birth of the underdog and the acknowledgement that with the power over model, There has to be someone on top and there has to be someone on the bottom. And this impacts the human psyche in so many ways. It is subtle and shocking. And it also impacts how we treat ourselves because we end up othering without being aware of it. Various parts of ourself, how we treat ourselves and how we treat our world are one and the same. So again, the inner work and outer work has to be addressed at the same time. The power over model also tends to lead to dynamics in which we uh, find justification to judge ourselves and one another all the time across the board. The more we drop into the wisdom of the human heart, the shared heart, it doesn't perceive judgment, folks. It does not perceive through that lens, and it doesn't perceive through hierarchy. It's a completely different center of relational intelligence in our bodies, in our consciousness. But through this power over model, we completely justify seeing through judgment. This can be manifest as uh, casually as being in social interactions, where instead of being open to connection with the whole of a human, uh, you're instead finding yourself judging or projecting they're judging you. It can go to the highest level of systemic discrimination, for instance, as we witnessed in the criminal justice system, which the statistic I recently heard was that if we counted the number of people, and we know the majority are men of color, in prison right now in the United States, that would be the fifth largest city in the United States of America. That's insanity. Okay. So the alternative um, is having a renewed understanding of shared power, how to embody it, how to surrender to it, how to be nourished by it, how to invite everyone you ever engage with into it. Shared power involves and invokes an ability to see one another clearly. This is called seeing with the heart, seeing beyond the domain of discrimination, the rational mind, the judging mind, the tendency to other. Cultural humility. This is such an important concept in teaching. I experienced my first teaching on cultural humility from Larry Yang, who some of you might know, who's an incredible Dharma teacher based in the East Bay. And I've really come to see some of the benefits of cultural humility as both a way that we can hold ourselves accountable to always practicing awareness of beginner's mind and really being willing to note anytime we're making assumptions about another human being, perhaps based on what we see visually, a voice, race, class, anything, that our mind might jump to assumptions about that person's history or life that are completely ungrounded and unfounded in anything. And equally being aware that there can be unconscious biases that I'm carrying, for instance, as a white woman, that I might be completely unaware of, that are limiting, and that are non-inclusive, and that are biases. It's interesting, as I'm talking, I'm aware that we could also look at this regarding patriarchy, and so we'll explore this more deeply. But just to introduce the notion, outer and inner cultural humility. When I'm offering people guidance about working with nature, working with a landscape, partnership with nature, cultural humility applies there too. not making any assumptions or imposing ourselves onto a landscape, but listening, beginner's mind, seeing clearly, and that's how we learn to work more harmoniously with life. From the paradigm of power with, we can really learn how to collaborate and co-create. I've witnessed so many times a human being saying, I'm really interested in collaboration, in co-creation, in being part of a team, with no embodied awareness of what it requires to be on a team, no awareness of what it requires to do anything other than compete or forcefully lead through a patriarchal model or mansplain to bring up that term humorously, but just thinking of all the different ways that we can sometimes not be aware that there are simple forms of communication that feed teamwork and collaboration and certain forms that don't. Okay, a couple other things I'll list right now. From the shared power model, we really, really, really learn how to give and receive feedback with care. This is such a big one because when we are in the power over model, there's no way to be in that model with having a big shield up. I got to be shielded at all times. I got to be protecting the power that's mine over you. And if someone gives me feedback, it's an attack. And in fact, if I'm going to give someone feedback, I'm going to do it through an attack or unkindly. Really, when we drop into community, collaboration, we consciousness, shared power, the art of giving and receive feedback is an art of love, letting ourselves soften and surrender with an unguarded heart as we receive feedback from another, and letting ourselves bring absolute kindness and compassion to offering another human feedback. No, this isn't an attack. There's no attack here. And no, I'm not being attacked, even if this is difficult to hear. So I feel tender in my body as I talk about that. Equally important in the shared power paradigm, being forgiving, being a forgiving human, and practicing forgiveness in your everyday life. Practicing vulnerability and understanding that vulnerability is our greatest strength, which I'll speak to more in a few minutes. Being able to have really difficult conversations together where we can get uncomfortable and acknowledge that we don't have to resolve things or get out of the discomfort. We can just, through wisdom, okay, it's wise, folks, hang out in the discomfort together and let our hearts soften and let our hearts hold discomfort together. That's wisdom. And I think the last thing I would say about this for now is that the shared power model truly acknowledges that everyone in every energetic state has a role, purpose. It's a model that acknowledges equity and innate value rather than this linear, comparative, measuring, judging system. So just pause, shared a mouthful, take in a deep breath, notice what's arising for you so far. So let's get a little clear about what we're even talking about as we talk about power. Um, in my experience, through Dharma practice and relational intelligence, through my own journey of reconnecting with the deep feminine, I believe that power is our ability to give and receive love moment by moment. Even that's tricky to say because love That word has been misused in so many ways in the culture that I live in. But really, truly, one's ability to give and receive love moment by moment. Now, in the patriarchal model, power is power over, force, authority over, okay? Um, what I'm talking about is revolutionary and radical in contrast to that. Sometimes when people first come to sitting meditation and they have a blissful experience in the beginning, and then they start a daily sitting practice and they say, oh no, what's happening? There's so much pain and grief and vulnerability and wounding to sit with, and it's so hard. What am I doing wrong? I'm supposed to be getting past this and getting to the light. I help clear up their confusion and affirm for them that the journey is, and my encouragement is, to spend as much time as you possibly can each morning meeting the most vulnerable part of you, resting in the discomfort, the vulnerability of our human fragility. Just that. Don't turn away from it. Rest into it. Spend as much time as you can resting in this vulnerability, this empty, fragile space, so that you can remember the strength of the shared human heart. Learn how to be with and meet the most vulnerable parts of you love, with love, never turning away. And that will open your heart to all of your capacity to meet the pain of our world, all of your capacity to see your fellow human beings through eyes of love, and also to understand that our sensitivity is our greatest strength. That would never, ever be uh, considered true under the model of patriarchy and power over. In my human experience, it's an absolute truth. It's an absolute. Our sensitivity is our greatest strength. And so when I was in my first year of college, I had the privilege of studying with an incredible teacher of feminine leadership, outdoor leadership, ecofeminism, phenomenal woman named Karen Warren. And one of the first teachings I received, we were, each of us in her course, guiding people in um, backpacking trips. And one of the first encouragements for taking people out into the wilderness as a group was always let the slowest person lead. Always let the slowest one lead. And she was offering a model for both introducing sharing and teamwork and honoring and equity in a group field. But she also offered me a profound spiritual teaching through that, which I've internalized for my life going forth, about letting go of the lens that judges the slowest part of us, or the slowest, and by that, that's a metaphor for the weakest aspect of another. Uh, Always letting the slowest one lead, always starting with that premises. And I can't tell you how much that supported me in my life, especially certainly as I navigated illness and um, feeling unsupported by the system as I went through that. But it supports me every day in myriad ways. Letting the slowest one lead. The power, that word power, and as it's used and what it means in our society, is really, really different than shared power, or our ability to give and receive love moment by moment, to stay in our vulnerability with an unguarded heart as we engage in the easeful and challenging aspects of human experience. It's very, very different. According to our society, power is something external that is given to some and taken away from others. So the power, this is not true power, but power as it exists in our system. The power society gives some and not others, completely as relates to race, class and income, gender, sexual orientation, religion, profession, age, level of attractiveness, level of physical strength, physical, mental, emotional ability or wellness, level of education, including what certificates someone has and has not, whether or not someone is more extroverted or introverted, whether or not someone fits more the patriarchal paradigm of how we should be or not, uh, body size and body type. Are you single? Are you in a relationship? Are you close to people in power or authority? Are you popular with the people society has deemed in, or are you with those society has ostracized? Um, we have to be really aware of this distortion of how power, which includes basic human rights, and which is something that I'm going to pause and just share that I'm sharing a resource list. This topic is so vast, folks. We could spend the next 5 years on it together as a group, and I hope that you all will, and many of you already are. But I'm aware with humility again that I'm a white woman speaking to this topic, and that this is one teaching video in the latter part of our 6-month experience. So I'm going to be presenting resources for you to go deeper. Okay. Um, and I'll also be inviting feedback and resources from some of you who have done such deep work, something I'm deeply inspired by right now, as people begin to open their eyes to the need to address systemic racism much more fiercely than we have, is that there have been some phenomenal books written and phenomenal voices coming forth. We have so many excellent guides in the work of addressing white supremacy as it relates to this topic of power and cultural humility. And I really would encourage you to share resources that are very illuminated for you in this time. Okay. So, having named what I just named, there are a few really misinformed basic assumptions that we make through hierarchical perception. Okay. And one is that, again, there has to be someone on top and someone below, which means through this paradigm, there always has to be someone left out. There has to be. Okay. Insanity. Number two, assumptions that life is a war, a battle. So power is force. And we got to be living in battle. That means it's also assumption we got to be guarded. We got to be protected. We got to be assuming the worst about each other. To continue, the assumption that there's a right or wrong way to be. Just that, just that. I've invited many of you to look at your conditioned standards, that the conditioned standards that have been made up and are lodged in your own psyche about how you are supposed to be deemed successful or worthy or lovable. Are you kidding? That all takes you away from your bone deep awareness of the innate value of life and you as an expression of life and the divine. Assumptions about inequity in the value of human beings. It's just such a big topic, isn't it? So I would ask you to just consider right now, and if you want to, you can take any notes. Is there anything you would add to that list that I've shared about the different ways that we give some power and not others? I'm inviting you to just be reflecting on how you've been affected by that list. To what degree have you been aware or unaware of uh, perhaps the power and privilege you've been given, perhaps the power and privilege you have not been given, okay, that's been ruthlessly taken away from you. And remember, always we want to inquire with non-judgment, with our hearts open, with curiosity. I know for me, my curiosity comes from my deep excitement to be alive at a time when we're actually embarking on this journey together, when we really have uh, the the potential to make some change in human consciousness. That's deeply exciting to me. So while it can be easy, I think, to want to avoid uncomfortable conversations, and I actually think we do that also through focusing on having heady conversations about this stuff instead of heart based conversations, or conversations that are just about the outer work that needs to be done and not the inner work, which includes me too. Um, or even getting confused and thinking that being woke is the work. Consider there to be a way that paradigm lets us off the hook from doing the deeper work.